This place is not for filthy people!
Verônica Azevedo, two-time world boxing champion, shouted across the luxurious gym in Manhattan. She called it a friendly spar, but everyone knew it was an insult dressed up as civility. 3 rounds, either prove your worth or crawl back to your poor Bronx neighborhood. Clara Silva, 18, black, from Brazil, stood still. By day, she scrubbed office floors. By night, she trained in a cramped basement. A scholarship had brought her here, but it was pride that kept her from stepping back. The champion was waiting to see fear, but what she found instead was absolute stillness, and a pair of eyes locked on hers, unblinking. A scornful voice rang out across the gleaming Manhattan gym, a place where expensive sweat mingled with pride. Well, look who just walked in. Verônica Azevedo, two-time world boxing champion, lifted her chin, a smile sharp as a blade cutting across her face. Before her stood Clara Silva, an 18-year-old black girl walking in with a frayed backpack and sneakers worn to the bone. The rhythmic thuds against the punching bags suddenly fell silent. Every gaze turned toward the girl from Brazil, her dark brown skin a stark contrast to the sterile white light of the gym. Here, a single month's tuition could feed a family in her neighborhood for half a year. Looks like someone got lost on their way to a community gym, Verônica sneered. The room broke into stifled laughter. Clara glanced down at her cracked phone screen, double-checking the address. Sorry, I thought this was the youth scholarship program. Veronica's laughter rang out, the sound of metal striking metal. Scholarship? Querida, this is for real athletes, not some social project. Clara said nothing. 6 months ago, she had arrived in America with a single small suitcase and the hopes of her entire family in Rio de Janeiro, people who had scraped together every coin to give her a chance. By day, she mopped office floors in the Bronx. By night, she hit the speed bag in a cramped basement. And now, this was her only doorway into the real world. The program is real. A man's voice came from the office. Thomas Ribeiro, the veteran coach and owner of the gym, stepped out, holding a stack of files. Clara Silva, her name's on the accepted list. The air thickened with silence. Verônica raised an eyebrow, her voice dripping disdain. Really, Thomas? You planning to turn this place into a charity center? My sponsors won't like that. Your sponsors pay for performance, not your ego, Thomas replied calmly. But Verônica didn't back down. She stepped closer to Clara, her eyes sharp and cold as a blade. All right then, Garota. If you want to stay, prove it. 3 rounds, you last the fight, you stay. If not, she tilted her chin slightly, go back to your Bronx. The gym went dead quiet. Everyone knew this wasn't an offer. It was a trap. Clara stood tall, eyes steady. I accept. Veronica's smirk deepened. You sure? I'd hate to get sued for breaking someone's bones. Sure, Clara answered softly, her tone calm. But her gaze carried something Verônica had never seen before. Absolute conviction. Thomas watched the two of them, sensing something was about to change. He'd seen that look before, not from reckless fighters, but from people who'd fought their whole lives just to exist. Back home, they called Clara by a name. Relámpago. Lightning. Because, like a storm, her true power only revealed itself when thunder struck. Word of the friendly match spread like wildfire. Within an hour, the gym was packed with fighters, trainers, and even a few sports reporters. A world champion versus an unknown girl. The perfect recipe for a viral spectacle. 3 rounds, 16-ounce gloves, no bets, no live stream. Thomas tried to set limits. Relax, Thomas, Verônica replied with a smirk, raising her phone camera. She won't even make it past the 2nd round. She began recording a story for her 2 million followers. Guys, you won't believe this. Some random girl wants to challenge me. Time for a little humility lesson. The comments poured in instantly. Show her who's boss, Reinha. People like her need to learn their place. While Veronica basked in the virtual cheers, Clara quietly stepped into the locker room. Her hands didn't tremble. They never did, but her heartbeat raced. Not from fear, but from memory. Thomas followed her in. "Clara, you don't have to do this. The scholarship's important, but don't let her hurt you." "She won't," Clara said, tightening her gloves. "She's got titles, technique, power, but I've got something she's never known." Thomas frowned. "What's that?" "Hunger." The small room fell silent. He had trained hundreds of fighters in 3 decades, but never heard anyone say that word with such eyes. Not hunger for food, but for recognition, for survival. "Why did you accept?" he asked quietly. Clara closed her eyes. Images flooded in. The alleyways of Rio, her mother's voice calling her home, the feel of her fists hitting an old sandbag, and the nickname Relampago echoing among the poor. "Because I've lived this story all my life," she said. "People like her think they can crush us with words, with contempt. But they forget one thing. Those who fight to live never step into the ring just to compete. They step in to survive." A chill ran down Thomas's spine. There was something prophetic in her tone. Outside, Veronica continued her little performance for the camera, her voice dripping with mockery. "Look what she's wearing," she laughed, pointing at Clara's worn-out shoes left on the floor. She didn't know that in just a few minutes, that very laughter would mark the beginning of the storm. "I bet she's never even stepped into a real ring before," Verônica Azevedo said loudly, wrapping her hands with a smug smile. "Probably learned boxing from YouTube." Laughter rippled through the gym like a wave of arrogance. But among the smiling faces, a few stayed quiet. They sensed something different, a danger hidden in silence. Marcos Santos, a former middleweight champion, whispered to his training partner, "Not so sure, Cara. I've seen that kind of calm before. The quiet ones. They're the ones you should fear." But Veronica didn't care. She kept staring into the camera lens, her voice snapping like a whip. "You know what's wrong with people from the third world. They mistake desperation for talent. They think hardship automatically makes them fighters." At that moment, Clara stepped out of the locker room. She wore a simple training outfit, no logos, no designer marks. Yet every movement carried a terrifying precision. Her arms were toned, her shoulders balanced, not the sculpted muscles of a luxury gym, but the strength of someone who'd spent a lifetime surviving. "Ready to learn?" Veronica smirked. "Always," Clara answered softly, eyes fixed on her opponent. No one knew that the 18-year-old girl had started boxing at 8, not in a sports club, but on the dusty back streets of Rio de Janeiro, where every punch could mean a meal for her family. At 12, she'd been knocking down boys 3 years older in underground fights, just to bring home enough money for rice. At 16, she was already a legend on the streets, not for her power, but for her ability to read an opponent's moves before they happened. And from that, the name Relampago, lightning, was born. Clara had once sworn that when she came to America, she would leave that past behind, that she'd never step into a ring again. But some promises exist only to be broken, especially when dignity is trampled. Thomas, the aging coach, knelt to tighten her gloves. He paused, startled. Beneath the smooth skin of the young girl's arms, her muscles were dense, like steel drawn under pressure. "Clara, be honest with me," he asked quietly. "You really never fought before?" Clara smiled, a light, fleeting smile that carried a secret powerful enough to upend the entire room. "Depends on what you mean by fight," she said. Before Thomas could respond, the air around them shifted. Something was moving. It was no longer a joke. It was the calm before a storm. While Veronica was still recording her 17th Instagram story, mocking the Brazilian girl, something else was unfolding behind the scenes. Thomas couldn't shake the feeling in his gut. 3 decades of coaching had taught him one truth. The truly strong never show off. And this girl, Clara Silva, wasn't trembling, wasn't talking, wasn't even glancing around. She just breathed, steady and focused, like a wild predator about to strike. "Clara, show me a few basic moves, will you?" She nodded. 5 minutes later, Thomas stood frozen. The way Clara moved around the ring, light, balanced, silent. Her punches, not flashy, not loud, but so precise he could hear the air rip through her gloves. "My God," he whispered, "who is this girl?" The gym door suddenly burst open. A man in his 50s stepped in, calloused hands and weathered eyes. "Relampago," he said softly. The entire gym fell silent. Clara spun around, her face pale. "Uncle Antonio, what are you doing here?" "I came to see if my niece has completely lost her mind," he said, his thick Brazilian accent cutting through the air. "I thought you promised to leave that life back in Rio." Thomas frowned. "You two know each other?" Antonio looked at him for a moment, then nodded. "Know her? I raised her since she was 8, and believe me, Verônica Azevedo has no idea what's about to hit her." Across the room, Verônica was still glued to TikTok, laughing brightly. "Look, she even brought her family to watch her humiliation. How cute." The comments flooded in. "Knock her out, Verônica. Show her what real boxing looks like. Put that girl in her place." Antonio watched her for a moment, then shook his head, his voice low and rough. "People like that. They're the kind Relampago used to teach humility back in Rio." "Please, Uncle," Clara begged softly. "Don't tell anyone. I don't want them to know." Thomas grew more curious. "Know what?" Antonio sighed. "Thomas, you seem like a good man, so I'll tell you straight. That girl everyone thinks is a rookie. She used to be the most feared street fighter in Rio de Janeiro." He looked over at Clara, practicing quietly in the corner, her punches slicing through the air, clean and perfect. At 12, she was dropping men twice her weight. At 15, the name Relampago made every thug in Rio back off. It wasn't a nickname. It was a warning. Thomas turned, his expression completely changed. Then why did she accept this fight? Antonio gave a weary smile. "Because some people confuse kindness with weakness, and Relampago Silva has never let anyone define her by her skin, her gender, or where she came from." The room went utterly still. In one corner, Verônica was still posing for the camera. In another, Clara took a deep breath and closed her eyes. Under the cold Manhattan lights, she heard familiar sounds. Rain hitting tin roofs, her mother's voice calling her home, the thud of fists on an old punching bag. She was back, and the storm was beginning to form. On the far side of the gym, Verônica Azevedo set her phone down after finishing another round of mocking videos about Clara. Her voice was bubbling with excitement as she called her business manager. "Rafael, this is going to blow up online. A champion humiliating an amateur. The kind of content every brand dreams of." Rafael's voice crackled through the speaker. "Just don't hurt her too badly, Verônica. We don't need another lawsuit." She laughed, a sharp, carefree laugh. "Rafael, I'll be done before she even blinks. Trust me." From across the room, Antonio Silva heard every word. He shook his head, eyes narrowing. "Thomas," he murmured, "if you're going to bet on Relampago. Why? Because Verônica Azevedo may be a champion, but she's never fought to survive. That girl, she's learned that losing means not eating. Verônica fights to win. Clara fights to exist." Just then, Clara approached, sweat tracing down her cheek, her breathing steady and deep. "Antonio, are you telling my stories again?" "Only the truth," he said firmly. "That you're not the fragile victim they think you are." She glanced around the gym. The same people who had mocked her earlier were now silent, their looks a mix of curiosity and respect. "Tio, I just want peace. To start over." "Peace," Antonio cut her off. "When someone mocks you for your skin, your voice, your home, You can change your clothes, your address, but not the blood in your veins, Menina. His words sent a chill through Thomas's spine. Clara, he said softly, why did you really accept this fight? She looked at Veronica, who was still laughing into her phone, certain the world belonged to her. When Clara spoke, her voice was low and gravelly, calm but unbreakable. Because people like her think they can decide our worth just by the color of our skin or the sound of our voice. She looks at me and sees a joke, a video to laugh at. But where I come from, respect isn't given, it's earned. With blood, with sweat, with survival. She smiled. It was no longer the gentle smile of a Bronx girl. It was the look of a predator before the storm. Sometimes, lightning has to remind the world why it fears the thunder. The air in the gym shifted. Everyone felt it. This was no longer a friendly spar. It was the moment when years of silence and humiliation were about to erupt. The bell rang. 2 women stepped into the ring, one carrying world titles, the other carrying the fury of the unheard. Round 1! Veronica lunged first, unleashing a flurry of jabs like bullets. But instead of impact, her fists sliced through empty air. Clara was gone, moving fast, light, like smoke drifting through wind. Stand still, girl, Veronica shouted, frustration creeping into her tone. But the more she attacked, the more her rhythm faltered. Clara moved as if she could see each punch before it came. When Veronica overextended on a right hook, Clara countered. Her left hand, clean, sharp, surgical, cracked against Veronica's cheekbone. The sound echoed across the gym, dry, violent. Veronica staggered back, stunned. She touched her face, disbelieving. No way. But Clara was already turning, moving again. Every strike had rhythm, a violent, graceful symphony. She wasn't flailing. She was conducting the fight. And Veronica, the world champion who had floored dozens, was now being pushed back, step by step. Who is that girl? Someone in the crowd gasped. Antonio smiled faintly. Clara Silva. Round 2. Veronica was exhausted now, her face red and swollen, her breathing ragged. Her phone, still live streaming, captured a comment section turning against her. She's actually losing? Where's the champ now? That Brazilian girl's a monster, Rafael shouted from ringside, panic rising. Veronica, counter, fight back. But the roar of the crowd drowned him out. They were cheering for Clara now. Clara stepped forward, her eyes like ice. Relampago, she said slowly, every word heavy as a hammer. Isn't just a nickname, it's a warning. And then the storm hit. A straight, a cross, a hook, a reverse hook. 4 punches in under 2 seconds, every one of them landed. Veronica collapsed, her body hitting the mat with the weight of a building coming down. The gym exploded. Shouts, cheers, cameras flashing, live streams flooding the internet. People had just witnessed the birth of a legend. Veronica tried to push herself up, but her legs wouldn't obey. For the first time in her life, the queen of boxing had fallen, brought down by the very girl she once called a projeto social. Thomas raised his voice. 10! Knockout! Clara removed her gloves and walked toward her opponent, who was being helped to her feet by staff. She leaned down, her voice soft but clear through the stunned silence. You said you wanted to teach me a lesson. I hope you understand now. Respect doesn't come from skin color, nationality, or a bank account. It comes from dignity. Veronica looked up, tears brimming in her eyes. No longer rage, but shame mixed with reluctant admiration. Rafael rushed over, holding up his phone. Jesus, Veronica. Look at this. You just lost 100,000 followers in 1 hour. Sponsors are pulling out. The screen flooded with comments. Karma, instant delivery. The champion has fallen. When prejudice meets reality. And Clara, she didn't smile. She didn't celebrate. She simply lifted her head, took a deep breath, letting the adrenaline fade. She hadn't just won a fight, She had shattered a false belief system. The Manhattan lights glimmered across her sweat-drenched face, and in her eyes there was something shining. Not pride, but release. Veronica held her phone with trembling hands. The screen glowed. Her last post, the one mocking Clara, had now become a memorial to her own downfall. The comments poured in with brutal irony. The one who laughs last laughs best. The Brazilian girl taught that racist a lesson. Relâmpago Silva, 1, arrogancia, 0. Thomas stepped forward through the crowd, which was now chanting Clara's name. Relâmpago, he said. May I ask you something? Of course. Why didn't you tell them who you were from the start? Clara glanced toward Veronica, who was still being supported on shaky feet. Her face swollen, her eyes shattered. Because sometimes, she said softly, people need to dig their own graves to realize how deep they've fallen. Antonio stepped forward and wrapped his arms around the young woman he'd raised. You'll always be my Relâmpago. Clara shook her head gently, her eyes softening. No, Tio. Relâmpago was the girl I used to be, the one who fought to survive. Today, I fought for dignity, not revenge. Phones continued recording. Clips of the historic knockout spread across the internet. And one question echoed in everyone's mind. Could a single fight change how the world sees prejudice, privilege, and the true meaning of strength? 3 months later, the contrast was merciless. Verônica Azevedo, once the undisputed queen of boxing, now sat alone in a small rented apartment in Miami, staring out at an empty balcony. The brands that once paid millions for her smile no longer answered her calls. Nike, Adidas, Gatorade, all had severed ties after the video, Veronica Destroyed by Brazilian Amateur, surpassed 50 million views in a week. She had become the symbol of self-inflicted arrogance, the punchline of the internet. In their final call, her former agent Rafael said bluntly, Veronica, you didn't just lose a fight. You showed the world who you really are, and no one invests in arrogance. Meanwhile, in Los Angeles, Clara Silva signed her first professional contract with Golden Gloves Promotions, $2 million for 3 debut matches, with an extension clause worth up to $50 million if she maintained her record. Clara Relâmpago. Silva was no longer just an athlete. She was a symbol of resilience, of triumph over circumstance. Under Armour launched a global campaign with the slogan, Earned, not given. Victory is something you fight for, not something you're handed. Thomas received a call from ESPN. We want to make a documentary about how you discovered Relâmpago Silva. He chuckled. I didn't discover anyone. She always knew who she was. I was just the first person who respected her enough to see it. The small academy in Manhattan, once dismissed and ridiculed, now received sponsorships from across the country. Over 500 scholarship applications piled high on the desks. Children from the Bronx, Rio, Detroit, Salvador. All came chasing the same dream. If she could do it, maybe I can too. Antonio often visited his niece. One quiet evening, he asked, Do you remember what I told you about hunger? Clara nodded. Now you've proven it. It's not where we come from that defines us, but the fire in our chest that refuses to go out. As for Veronica, she tried to make amends. She launched a YouTube channel to apologize, but the comments were filled with hate. She tried to return to the ring, but no sponsor would sign her. Her bank account slowly drained. In a small podcast interview, her voice hoarse and her eyes hollow, she finally admitted, I was completely wrong. Clara Silva isn't just a fighter. She's someone I should have respected from the very beginning. But the internet has a long memory. Ironically, the interview itself became a new meme. When arrogance tries to apologize after losing everything. When asked about it, Clara simply smiled. I don't hate her. Anger burns the one who carries it. I choose to build bridges, not burn them. Her Sonjos Relâmpago Foundation had already provided scholarships to more than 300 underprivileged teens across Latin America. The first academy opened in Rio de Janeiro, in the same favela where she had once learned to fight to survive. During the inauguration ceremony, before hundreds of cameras, Clara stood on stage. She held the microphone with the same hands that had once knocked down a world champion. "This story isn't about revenge," she said, her voice rich and warm. "It's about dignity, about proving that respect doesn't come from power or wealth, but from character." Applause thundered, but she continued. "Verônica Azevedo gave me the greatest gift of my life, her contempt. And when someone underestimates you, you have two choices: let it crush you, or turn it into the fuel that makes you unstoppable." Thomas sat in the front row, quietly wiping away tears. In 30 years of coaching, he had trained champions, but he had never seen anyone transform humiliation into light so gracefully. Months later, Clara Silva became the unified world champion, defeating her opponent with a knockout in the second round, just like she had done to Verônica. When the golden belt was placed around her waist, she spoke before millions watching around the world. "I want to thank everyone who ever belittled me, who tried to silence me. You taught me that true strength doesn't come from where we're born or the color of our skin. It comes from never allowing anyone to define our limits." In Miami, Verônica sat alone in her rented apartment, watching the match on TV. When the referee raised Clara's hand, she smiled faintly, for the first time understanding the difference between talent and greatness. Talent is what you're born with. Greatness is forged in the fire of adversity. The lights in the gym had long gone out, but the story hadn't ended. Because Clara Silva's victory wasn't just in the punch that knocked down a champion. It was in how she rose above every prejudice, transforming humiliation into the power to change a system that once said she didn't belong. While Verônica Azevedo lost everything to arrogance, Clara rediscovered herself through compassion. She didn't seek revenge. She triumphed by becoming someone her rival could never be. And when the final light shone down on the ring, the world finally understood. Some storms aren't born to destroy, but to cleanse, and to give justice a new beginning. What do you think of the way Clara chose to respond to prejudice? With strength or with grace? If you were in her place, what would you do when the world looked down on you for where you came from? Share your thoughts below. And if this story made you believe that sometimes contempt can be the spark that makes us shine, leave a comment. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Because those underestimated today may just be the legends of tomorrow.